some really great authors. So this is Changing Tech and Alternate History. Can we go ahead and go down the line, just introduce ourselves, please?
Sure. Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Ikenberry. I'm one of the newest people in the 1632 realm. I wrote the City Sharks novel, The Crossing. Eric was my editor for that, and I typically write military science fiction. The Crossing was the first iteration I had into alternate history, but I've been a fan of it for a very long time, and very happy to be here.
I am Virginia DeMarce. I've been involved in the 1632 universe since 2002. I am on this particular panel as the voice of low-tech, uptime items that appeal and would have appealed with thrill to downtimers. The lava lamp, the fart cushion, really, they would have adored them. So I am here talking about clothes wringers, not washing machines that require electricity, but the wringer. Yeah. So that's what my level of tech.
I'm Gorg Huff. I wrote my first book about the making of sewing machines in the 17th, my first story about the making of sewing machines in the 17th century. Since then I've written, I don't know quite how many books in Eric Sturge's universe, but quite a few. Many of them in Russia, but also the Alexander, the Queen of the Sea series, the Alexander and Aragon series, the Peterbilt, and then a sort of side one that didn't actually end up being a Shard book called The Demons of Paris, which was, but is also, though it's got magic in it, is still alternate history.
My name is Jack Carroll. I'm an electronics engineer and a nearly lifelong ham. Most of my fiction in the series depends in one way or another on the realistic depiction of technology that the characters in the series really could master and put to work. And I'm eternally grateful to all the authors and fans in the 1632 universe who have advised me on many subjects outside the technology of the 19th century and the first third of the 20th.
Thank you. Can someone tell a specific piece of tech in 1632 or any of the other universes that they're particularly fond of?
I'm really fond of the sewing machines.
I'm fond of the manufacturing of machine tools. That's the foundation of everything in the 1632.
What he said.
How about you, Don?
I think that, of course, in The Crossing, with it just kind of being the first story, there's really not a whole lot of the technology that's been introduced. But I think the concept that would really fascinate and drive a lot of innovation would be the concept of interchangeable parts. I think that would be, especially with at the end of The Crossing, with Jefferson getting the modern technology, he would very quickly recognize the concept and how they were manufactured and how it all worked together. So I think the interchangeable parts piece would be a lot of fun for them to continue to explore.
I think it'll take about 10 years to master. They have enough clues, but there's some steps to go through.
I agree. I think it would be 10 years, maybe 7 to 8. I agree.
The one of which I am most fond, the late lamented Rick Boatwright and I used to have a great deal of fun coming up with ideas. The wilder, the better. And at a different Minicon many years ago, we came up with the idea of Carrollian photography for aura reading. And I think that one is still my favorite of the weird ideas the two of us developed.
Just real quickly, can everybody hear us okay?
Yes.
Because every once in a while with the acoustics here, we get a funny echo. I just want to make sure everybody can hear it. So,
How about anybody in the audience? Does anyone have a favorite piece of tech or a piece of tech they'd like to see in the future in any of the universes?
I'm just curious, how long it would take in the 1632 universe to get to very basic electronics. Maybe at the level of vacuum tubes, you know, or, and also, you know, we don't necessarily have to reconstitute everything that happened in our timeline. There are shortcuts that can be taken. What would be required to, say, provide the basic chemical industry that would support like basic transistors, you know, 1940s era kind of stuff. You know, is that many decades, or is that, you know?
Okay, let me take those questions one at a time. In canon, the date the first set of working parts of a vacuum tube operates in a laboratory vacuum chamber is October 13th, 1634. And that appears in my second story in Great Movies F-15.
Can you bring the mic close to you?
Sorry, yeah, let me move my chair in. Okay, the first completed vacuum tube would be around December of 1634. And in the novel I'm working on right now, there's a whole lot of detail on how the engineers and all their supporting people, the vacuum group, the materials group, sources of finance from the government, and sources from outside the country. The first high-power transmitting tubes are made in the spring of 1635. The engineering team spends the rest of the year completing a suite of half a dozen tubes required to complete a communication receipt. So production gets underway in 1636 and ramps up. Now, transistors are a whole different problem. The problem is that you need to know much more about physics, physical chemistry, and chemical processing to make the raw materials that transistors are made of, and the processing that turns a slice of germanium or silicon into a transistor. And without going into a long song and dance, I'm estimating 1642 to 1645 for the first working audio transistor. And that is a low performance transistor like the ones I built audio amps out of in the early 50s. That is nothing like a 2N696 that you can use in a VHF walkie-talkie. That is an audio transistor. Figure maybe 1650 to have a fairly complete suite of discrete semiconductor components. And then you can begin to think about ICs.
Very interesting. Much faster than I would have expected. Yeah.
I've got a question. This is a storyline question. You've got your team working in sovereign states. We've got them getting the tubes. Now, so my question is Vlad one of the guys supporting your guys' team, or is he using industrial espionage to steal the secret?
I don't know. The Russians may have set up a team similar to the one at GE and done their own research. Certainly.
Yeah, that's one of the things. You can expect that there to be several teams trying to do this.
Well, as a matter of fact, in the last story I published, I set out to account for the Dutch having vacuum tubes in what's the name of the latest novel? It's not Coastal Chaos. Yeah, it is Coastal Chaos. How'd they do that? So I sat down to figure out how they did it, and they wrote Another Country Heard From. That is where the Dutch figure out what GE is up to, and their engineering graduates from Leiden estimate pretty quickly how big a task this is, and they realize GE has bit off more than they can handle in the schedule they're trying to work. So they make a business proposal. Hire these two guys to flesh out your team and work. We got a consortium of marine insurers in Amsterdam who are willing to invest heavily in GE to speed the project up. So The deal is, the Dutch get a share of the tube output, while GE is the only manufacturer, and they get GE's assistance in setting up the tube factory in Holland somewhere. And this has to be negotiated diplomatically, but the deal is made. And that's why they're a Dutch colony, and one of the mainline novels has radio gear with tubes in it.
I know like in Grantville, they've got a good water supply. What's the timeline for like putting in good water supplies in like Paris, Hamburg, the other cities that weren't truly devastated? Because it takes a lot of work to put in your water and sewer, but those are critical to your public health.
I think that's more a political and economic matter than a technical matter. Now, there are two engineering schools that are established by 1635, and certainly the French, the Italians, and anybody else could send students there to learn uptime practices and get a handle on the physics of the 18th century that all this stuff is based on. But I think those kind of things would be driven much more by economics and politics than by technology.
And you have to keep in mind that even downtime, situations varied from place to place. It was much harder for a large city, such as London or Paris, than it was for, say, the university town of Jena, very close to Grantville. Jena at the time was situated near a rather high hill. They had a very large reservoir dug into the top of the hill with gates that opened. And when there was sufficient rain, and in Germany there is normally not a problem with having sufficient rain, at least once a week, they opened the city gates, both sides, they opened the reservoir, and they sluiced out the streets of Jena down into the river, which meant that Jena did not have collected stink the way a larger city would. So a town of 8,000 or 10,000 people could be kept reasonably clean much more easily than a town of 100,000. In the Germanies, there were very few large urban complexes at the time of the Ring of Fire. So the quantity of work to be done to bring that type of thing to the average German town was much less, and we have in canon that in Magdeburg, as they were rebuilding, they put them in, so.
If I could kind of spin that a little bit on towards what I'm intending to do with the crossing. So you have a group of Army ROTC cadets who have with them a cadet handbook, which talks about the deployment and proper positioning of a field sanitation, right? Where am I going to dig my latrine? If you think about the timeline of the Continental Army, there were not so much what we call standard operating procedures or SOPs these days. They didn't really have that. And so if you start looking at the different contexts and the training that would be available to them and showing the Continental Army, hey, look, if you do these simple practices of where you place your latrine, how you wash your hands, how you boil water and sterilize it, you were talking potentially about the cutting of dysentery by 50 to 75% immediately, which then you start looking at troop strength and how that's going to protect the Continental Army versus what the British Army might still be dealing with. It's a significant advantage going forward. So just simple advancements in hygiene in the particular university crossing are going to have a monumental effect on the battlefield that nobody's going to expect. And then you take that and look at how wound care is done, again with sterilization of instruments and whatnot. Now you're going to have a likelihood progression of disease or infection. It's going to have a substantial effect going forward. So not only looking at what's happening mainline canon in the 1632 universe, but the way that it's been constructed with our different shard universes, simple things that we don't think about that much would have a substantial effect on essentially those in the timeline that we're affecting.
What about the Semmelweis problem? I mean, I agree
Sure.
with everything he said, but there is going to be, and we've to an extent glossed over it more than we
Sure.
should have, the problem that you've got this brilliant useful piece of information, it's going to save a bunch of lives, and then you've got a whole bunch of people who do not want to believe it because they don't want to believe that what they've been doing all this time has been
Absolutely.
killing people.
Yeah.
That's going to be hard for them to take.
Absolutely, and if you look this particularly, I'm just going to keep it in the context of the Continental Army.
Yeah.
So in the 1777, 1778 timeframe is when Washington and the Continental Army bring in the concept of the camp follower, and how the camp followers essentially work to cut dysentery, work to standardize the cooking of food. So we started to learn that in my particular area of the universe, if you will. That's just going to accelerate things a little bit, like we were just talking with interchangeable parts. It's the same thing where you're going to eventually come to the same conclusion, but we're just going to kind of push that forward a little bit. And
Yeah, and you've got Washington, and since you've got Washington on your side, that's going to help a lot.
Exactly. I just had this conversation not long ago. Washington was a very logical person, and if you show, hey, we're doing this because of this, this, and this, he would most likely buy off on that and be able to push that out to his subordinate units. So, yeah, it's certainly a problem, but it's something that, again, we're going to eventually solve it.
Right.
Maybe we're just cutting down that timeline and eliminating some of the scientific method, if you will, the experimental phase. So,
Yeah,
Well, I might say show me.
absolutely.
yeah.
Virginia, I don't think we've looked too deeply into the social impact of the Indiana and Navy medical education program. Do you have any thoughts of how that would interact with the society of the time?
The,
The Yana and Leahy Medical,
Medical education.
Beth Ann, she is the person who has put all of that together for reference purposes. Everything that's in canon, basically, she's put together. But it will spread largely because the education system of the 17th century was less systematic than that of the early 19th century, and therefore they have fewer entrenched bureaucracies to
Right.
deal with.
and nobody's protecting their tenure.
Because at the time that the Ring of Fire takes place, the Jena School of Medicine had 3 professors. You know, it was not the size of Padua. It was not the size of the great Italian universities. It was a small faculty, and we have brought in personal relationships developing between those 3 faculty members and the people in Granville, which is largely why they are able to do it. The same is largely going to be true in other educational fields. I have the first woman admitted to the law school in Jena being the daughter of a former dean of the law school married to a current law professor. In other words, this is not going to be, oh, shock, we are admitting this girl to the law program. It's going to be, this is a respected middle-aged woman whose competence everyone knows, and basically we're just giving her a degree to acknowledge what she's been doing in assisting her father and husband for the last 25 years.
And can I add something in? You mentioned medicine. University of Copenhagen had a very good medical school, which we hadn't realized really, and so nothing has been written in canon about it. And something I write going forward, I am going to have the widow of a recent head of that university, and it was also the daughter of a former head of the university whose children went on to become famous doctors in their own right. is going to go to Grantville with her family's blessing because her kids are teenagers, and they're going to finish their education with the Grantville High School, and they're going to go through the Leahy-Yena process. But it's going to include her daughter, right? So they're going to have someone who is scratch educated, basically, through their system, and then enters that system. But she is, again, as Virginia was saying, she's part of the system, basically. She's part of the family. She's not unknown. She's coming in from the bottom. She's not taking an unknown area. So there will be different ways that the families are able to integrate themselves that are already part of the educational system and bring in Grantville knowledge.
I would add.
The same will be true through Leiden at some point, because Leiden will have developed many contacts with Grantville on other things. I've been rather disappointed on medical education that so few of our authors have chosen to write about what was being done in Magdeburg. But, I mean, we're dependent on people writing stories. If they don't write the story, it's not in the canon.
It was something in the crossing that was very important for me, is being able to talk about how modern combat life-saving skills can be applied in a revolutionary time frame. So if you haven't read the crossing, I apologize, I'm going to spoil something for you. So when Washington's army goes into Trenton, there's two main casualties that actually take place during the Battle of Trenton, and they're treated by a man by the name of Riker, Dr. Riker. And what I did with the crossing is I had one of my cadets, one of the young females, as an EMT, emergency medical technician. And when she sees the casualties happen, she goes in as a first responder would, with the same type of mindset. And she is the one that actually clamps the artery in James Monroe's shoulder, James Monroe, future president of the United States, who was one of those two casualties. And there's this moment where the doctor is asking her, "Are you a doctor?" She says, "No, I'm an EMT." And of course, I haven't had a chance to explain all of this yet, but it's the same type of show me mentality where she goes in, takes charge of the situation, clamps the artery right there on the battlefield without any of the other pretense that would need to happen in traditional colonial terms, where they would evacuate, evaluate, and then eventually get to whatever they needed to do. She does it right then and there on the spot. So it was very important as we went through the writing of the crossing. Eric was like, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "This is important because we're talking now about potentially changing the entire field of combat trauma and triage." And it was very important to start to establish that in the first book and be able to continue that as we go forward.
And it is, to a great extent, the spread of technology going to be a matter of who people know, as well as what people know. There was a reason why, after Eric and I talked about it, that the first downtown surgeon we had come to study at Leahy, he was not a student, a fully qualified servant, but it was Johannes Skoltatus, and we brought him in because the Skoltatus bandage is still in use, and therefore the uptime doctors would at least have heard the man's name and known, he was.
He did, yeah.
He did something important.
I would add one more feature that's a little bit less clear, because you've just got the 12 guys, right?
Right.
So in 1632, you've got this great, big, huge, 6 mile across, changing of the thing. So you've got bona fides. Sure. In the Queen of the Sea, you've got something very similar in that you've got a big cruise ship. Even in Peterbilt, you've got the Peterbilt and this really magical thing. You've got 6 guys, you've got 12 guys.
And what they're carrying on their back. That's
And
exactly
what
right.
they're carrying on their back. So their road is going to be harder. They've got less
Absolutely.
proof coming in.
Absolutely.
So it seems like that you guys are taking more of a hands-on educational means to gain credibility rather than philosophical or
Right.
theoretical. And do you think that's because this is still a pre-literate society?
No, it's not a pre-literate society. Actually,
It's a much more literate society than we have today.
I wouldn't go that far.
No.
But the 1632 is not pre-literate. They could read, they could write, they had books, and especially in Germany, it was less true in England, but especially in Germany and Central Europe, most people were at least literate.
And it varied from place to place. One of the proverbs in France, for example, was that the Vosges Mountains produced more school teachers than the rest of France produced elementary school teachers, students for them to teach.
Right.
So that a lot of them went and taught in schools in other places because you just didn't have that. But basically, there is all the broadsides, the pamphlets,
The cheat sheets.
the newspapers. Elizabeth Eisenberg's History of Early Modern Printing is 3 volumes long, and it covers not just the technology, but also the distribution. It was common, for example, that the village taverns subscribed to newspapers, and then everybody came and read them. In a town, individuals were more likely to subscribe, but in a village, they get in one newspaper for the village as a whole. But there's enough there that I got to do my scene in Driessen on when the villain's copy machine broke, and they are basically the classic howl from the staff. Somebody come and fix the copy machine, because we are, churning out propaganda as fast as we can, and if our copy machine doesn't work, and the copy machine that I had them using, and is the basis for Vignali business machines as compared to IBM, is an actual thing that my brother and I and Kenny and John Cavsey, who lived about a quarter of a mile up the road, cobbled together in Mr. Cavsey's workshop about 1950. It's the bastard child of a Rolodex, and we had all of that, but it worked. I don't know if it would have been a good achievement, but we really could make copies on this silly little machine that we created. And there will be, again, people will not necessarily come to Grantville and decide we need to make a copy machine just like this one. Rather, they will hear somehow they make automatic copies using stencils. Now, how would you do that? And there will be 10 different answers.
I think it's also the application of context as well. So in the crossing, the cadets actually use bed sheets to camouflage themselves. And Washington is very familiar with the concept of camouflage coming out of the French and Indian Wars, but seeing it in the application of what the cadets are doing from a modern technology standpoint, the understanding how important cover and concealment is, it's a fundamental change for him. So that at the end of the crossing, he makes the declaration: any place we find white sheets, as long as there's snow on the ground, we will use them. So it's this application of something that's very different. It's not necessarily what's Clark's third law. Any significant technology is going to appear indistinguishable from magic. It's nothing along those lines. It's something that's very real and very capable right in front of them that's used in a different context. So it's just a fundamental change in how I look at a white sheet versus having the incredible technologies that the cadets have and what limited equipment that they have. So it's just a little bit use of something different that seen from more modern eyes.
So it's almost more of a philosophy, because what the uptimers have, and whatever universe it is finite in number.
Yeah.
So it's more about the philosophy that they bring and how they adapt it.
Absolutely. It's looking what's available to you in a different light.
And that's certainly
We have a
something.
Yeah, so Going back to the interesting technologies from the series, one, and I fell off my readings a few years ago, so if something's been done with this that I haven't seen yet, enlighten me, but there was one of the books where a couple of Grantville guys showed up with scuba gear and applied it to a specific situation, and I thought there was a lot more room to run with where that leads, either with the modern equipment itself and with the technologies to support it and what spins off of that.
I don't know who or whether anybody's done anything further with the scuba divers planting mines on the bottom of the ship.
Could they compress the water? Sir?
What?
Could they compress the air into the tanks?
Yeah, I was trying to remember if in the story they had a compressor to refill the cylinders after they were
Yeah,
used.
even
or
if
that
they
was-
didn't have a compressor, they can make
Yeah.
a compressor down now.
Yeah,
As I recall, they used two different diving systems. One was scuba with compressed air, and the other was hard hat diving with an air pump on the surface.
Yeah.
They did both.
yeah, and I just,
Actually, they screwed up with the hard hat diving.
Yeah.
Somebody,
Oh, yeah, the Danes screwed up with the hard hat diving because they didn't put a non-return valve in the
right, yeah.
and there was a terrible malfunction.
About the question of modern technology, I think in one of the stories it's mentioned that Magdeburg, the Elba, is getting polluted because of all the industry there. What are they thinking or doing about trying to implement a lesser impact of that sort? Because we know, for instance, the Simpsons came from Pittsburgh, and there's the famous, the Dan River went on fire. Or was that in Cleveland?
At Cleveland.
Cleveland, but that kind of thing should be in their minds as they're doing this. And another comment about how ideas are either accepted or not. One of the reasons that Semmelweis got into trouble was that he was Jewish. And that all the anti-Semites in Austria were not going to be told to wash their hands by some crooked Jew. And that kind of prejudice could affect what happens.
Well, they're not, the downtimers are not going to be seriously worried about pollution for probably a couple of decades.
But I think they
but the
attack it
uptimers
now.
can warn them in advance.
They can warn them, but
By
that
getting them to
doesn't
listen.
mean they're going to pay a lot of attention because they're making trade-offs in a very
Yeah,
fast
the
level.
truth is, we've known about, oil pollution and oil, and we still have the Exxon Valdez, we still have Texas City blowing up like 3 times.
And can I make a comment? It doesn't mean there won't be anything happening to help the environment, right? We have the dodo book, which is not a technology thing, but they're going to save the dodo specifically, right? And there's a storyline that I plan on working on another novel or 2 from now. And basically there's a whole series of islands over time off the west coast of Scotland and Ireland that are going to be taken as nature conservation areas by the Celtic Christian Church. And by taken, I mean they're going to buy them. They're not going to they're going to still be part of Scotland, but they're going to own the land and they're going to run it in a certain way. And basically the Celtic Christian Church is going to start doing conservation, and the Flannery Foundation is going to start doing conservation, and other groups will start doing conservation. So while yes, there will be very definite impacts in terms of environmental pollution and environmental problems, there will also be people who are doing conservation efforts that didn't happen in the real world. So the dodo bird will be saved, great auk will be saved, other things will be saved that didn't. So there's not just a loss.
It's not unidirectional. Things will go. And again, going back to Rick Boatwright, you cannot believe how unconcerned the downtimers are going to be with safety standards. You are in a century when half of the people who went out from Amsterdam on the Dutch East India Company ships as crew did not survive to return. They are not going to worry if half of their experimental flights end up with a pilot fatality, they'll just try again.
Entirely different view of risk.
If they ever read an OSHA handbook, it'll be hilarious to them.
Yeah.
Well, I remember this short,
Don't forget that.
I like this short story that I read about a downtimer who was developing some kind of technology, and he wanted to, I don't know if it was ovens or tanks or whatever it was.
Microwaves.
Was it
No, that was an uptime.
No, that wasn't it. But the thing was is that, there was actually an environmental requirement that there be some kind of scrubber kind of thing, which he could not afford, so he did something else until he could afford it, and then he built the plant with the scrubber on it.
Right,
Yeah.
it had something to do with a mill and polluted water.
Right. So I was like, even then, they could do things even then, and have regulations even then.
But if you read the
There were
papers
lots of
now, who
regulations.
cares?
So it wouldn't necessarily be a free-for-all of the environment,
Yeah.
just
But,
because.
in a city like Nuremberg, which for the time was highly industrialized, along the pavements, there was some kind of a water mill every 100 yards or so. And there were regulations covering how much water each mill could use, how much they had to spill on down the river so that the rest of the mills could use them. There were inspectors who enforced this. In other words, if you have enough competing interests in a resource who want their share, you will have regulatory enforcement. If you put your mill down in a spot where there are no competitors,
Then you can do what you want.
then you can pretty well do what you want as long as whoever owns the resource and has leased it to you doesn't care.
Gentleman in the back in this next lady in the front, please.
Are they going to look at things like the Dutch elm disease, the chestnut blight? Are they going to think about that? Because the chestnut blight just wiped the chestnut, American chestnut tree, it's gone, essentially, throughout the U.S.
I wouldn't say it's likely to be high on their priorities in the circumstances of the 1630s and 1640s. I mean, the dodo got saved because Princess Christina got fascinated by the dodo.
Yeah.
If you can find a wealthy and influential patron who is interested in Dutch elm disease, they might do something about it, but you're going to have somebody who's willing to pay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, with respect, they've already dealt with, and I don't know what the mechanism was, because as I understand it, American phylloxera came over to France in the 19th century. And I don't know what the mechanism for having it here already, which is one of the stories. They suggest that people grow green beans. But with respect to your comment about the mills, that water could be absolutely filthy and it wouldn't make any difference for the running of the mill. So you're talking about sharing wealth rather than
Yeah.
what do we care, hey, like Terry Pratchett's joke about the Alm River, boy, it must be healthy, look at all these little things that live in it.
You're right, but the point, I think, taking it, broadening it just a little bit, now you've got the person who lives on the river 3 miles down complaining to the dude saying, they've ruined our water, what are we gonna drink? And but yeah, it's you're gonna have to be goring somebody's ox before something gets done.
I know they had regulations for things like tanneries, which were,
Yeah.
and so forth. That's because nobody wanted to smell it.
Yeah. And well, you add in the knowledge, uptimer knowledge about germs and so forth, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of people are going to be very upset about the polluted water that they're being asked to drink.
If they believe it.
A lot of them are going to.
They will believe the color. They will believe the sediment.
Yeah, I mean, they knew dirty water.
But it's a touching the hot oven thing, right? The COC has gone through in enough areas and forced people to behave and follow their rules. And they can see that when you follow the COC rules and you wash your hands and you don't have the toilet next to where you're getting your water, less people die, right? I mean, they're not stupid, they can put those together. And like, as with anywhere, there will be some of them who are stupid and continue to do things. But by and large, they're going to be able to look at the results and see that this makes sense. Now, if there was an invisible pollutant, they might have a lot more trouble with it. But to what Virginia's saying, they'll be able to look at it and see this is dirty water, and we've figured out that that's bad.
I will speak plainly here. I grew up in a house on a farm in Missouri. Our drinking water was rainwater that came under the roof of the house, was collected in gutters, and went down into a cistern. We pumped it out into buckets. We let it settle. Then we poured out the clearest part through gauze into another bucket, and then we drank it. We did not put chlorine powder in it, we did not boil it. We just got the worst of the solids out of it before we consumed it.
Also, it was rainwater, which is better than...
Except that it sat in that
Ah,
dirty cistern for several weeks before we used it.
And yet, as late as the
My brother
1890s,
gives rural schools. My father was on the school board for the consolidated school district that hadn't yet built a central building. Part of the school board's duty at the opening of the school year for a one-room, 8th grade rural school was to go to the cistern at each of the schools, open it, dig out anything that had died in the cistern over the course of the summer. People, even in the 1940s in this country, with whatever level of knowledge they had, were not all that sensitive about these things.
well, I know in my own family, my grandmother's two sisters died in the 1890s of summer sickness. Their outhouse was here, their pump was here. I visited in Germany my, I guess she'd be my second cousin, she was an adult during World War II. And here is the pig pen, and here's the water pump. This is 20th century, like you said. Well, late 19th and 20th century, and they died.
Yes, many of our fans have trouble adjusting to the lack of sensitivity about these things which existed up into my living memory, certainly.
Unrelated question, Ken. In the crossing, it's mentioned that one of the cadets had an iPad with a number of books on it, and I believe there was a charger, a solar charger.
Solar charger, yeah.
So I'm just curious, the particular selection of books would, I think, be fairly important moving forward.
Yeah, I'm not spoiling that yet.
Not spoiled.
No, and that was something that I wanted to introduce, and the whole at the end where Jefferson comes in to basically take all of the technology, that was all designed for that reason, and it's designed to spread out what the potential storylines will be as the cadets go forward and pursue what I call a more perfect union.
I think we could make practically a whole novel out of the process of publishing all those books, turn it into and print on paper and distribute.
Oh, absolutely.
So we got time for about one more question. Anybody in the audience? Anyone else? No? Can everybody introduce themselves where we can find their stuff? Anything you guys want to talk about? Is there one last thing?
Okay, pretty much all my stuff is available on Amazon, aside from the 1632 universe. And also there are some free books out on the 1632 table here. But aside from the 1632 universe, there's also the Warspell multiverse, which is the introduction of modern technology in a world full of magic, and the introduction of magic into a world full of modern technology, going both ways. So they're a lot of fun. We've got space opera, and then the Demons series. But so basically, I'm available on Amazon. And
For me, my most recent publisher, they said, please send us the list of your publications. And I emailed back and said, my first professional article was published in 1961. Are you sure that you mean this question seriously? But I was on Zoom with Alexi Vandenberg once. He was also apparently on Amazon. And he said, hey, this book's Soldiers for Sale. Is this the same Virginia DeMarce? And I said, yes, but that's just the latest publisher's attempt to find a zippy title for German military settlers in Canada after the American Revolution. In other words, you can find me in about 4 different incarnations here and there. Professional historian, genealogist, 1632, and starting a new series on genealogical crime mysteries. The first is now out called Sleeping Dogs from Top of the World. So basically, if you can look me up on WorldCat, you'll find 4 different versions of Virginia DeMarce, and that doesn't cover government technical methods.
Everybody, you can find me at kevinikenberry.com. I've got 25 novels in multiple different universes, including the Horseman universe, the Guardian Company universe, and I have a new series that will be coming out in the fall from Aethon Books called The Buzzard War. For this weekend, if you haven't gotten a copy of The Crossing, I have them with me. I'm at Chris Kennedy's table in the main area outside the fishbowl and the Rose and Camellia rooms, so look forward to seeing you all through the convention.
Me or Phil?
no, I already did.
Okay. All right, I have 22 stories published in the Great Gazette. I don't know if there is any prospect of making them available anywhere. Beth Ann, do you know anything about that? Of republishing the Great Gazette stories?
They're available online. Anything else we'll have to deal with at a different time.
All right.
If you would like to, you can set up and you can self-publish them as
Gorg, we need to wrap this up, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. Edith Wild and I have one novel that's published by Real Fire Press. There are hard copies available on Amazon at truly insane prices, and I don't know if that's going to be republished. And I have one novel in progress.
Well, folks, it's been a pleasure. Let's let Mr. Kennedy set up. Thanks. And come join us here.